7, verses 6 and 7. For the son treats the father with contempt. The daughter rises up against her mother, the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the men of his own house. But as for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me.
That's if you are familiar with scripture, you will know that's not a traditional Christmas reading passage. And I wanted to read from take a passage from Micah 7 because we're starting this series this Christmas where each week we're going to focus on a theme of Advent, and there are four themes that we want to focus on. There's hope and peace and joy and love. So over the next 4 weeks, including Christmas Day, we're going to focus on one of these themes. And today we want to focus on hope. And if you think about Christmas and the kind of feelings that are typically associated with modern day Christmas, they're kind of feelings of happiness and joy and warm, fuzzy feelings. But if you think about the first Christmas was associated with feelings of anxiety and fear and shame and all kinds of uncertainty. There was political chaos, there was social chaos, there was personal chaos. And I wanted to go to a passage in Micah 7 where there's a prophet who's experiencing all of these things. And in India, particularly now, where we may actually for the first time be experiencing feelings that are associated with the first Christmas. There is political chaos, there is social chaos, and there is personal chaos. And in Micah 7, we're going to see this prophet speaking out of who's witnessing political chaos, social chaos, and personal chaos. And he's still hoping, he's still hopeful. And we want to ask the question, how can we enjoy this season if we feel that there's no real reason for joy? How do we enjoy this season of joy if we feel that there's no reason for joy? Because everywhere you look, there's chaos. Everywhere you look, there's chaos. So we're going to see three things. We're going to see grieving, perceiving, and trusting. And first of all, for the son treats the father with contempt, the daughter rises up against her mother, the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the men of his own house. One of the reasons that I trust the Bible is because of its kind of unfiltered view of reality. It has an uncensored storytelling posture. If ever there was a movie made about the Bible, I don't think it would pass the Indian censor board because it's just too real. It's too graphic, and it's just the story is an uncensored portrayal of reality. And in this particular chapter in Micah 7, the prophet is actually seeing three things in his time. He's seeing people who are callous. They're godless people. There's a sense in which there are no good people left, and the sense that you can't trust anyone because everyone's out to get you. So there's a sense in which people have become callous and insensitive to God, and everyone's doing their own thing, and everyone's out to get you. So you can't trust anyone. He's also seeing corrupt leaders. He's seeing a breakdown in the political system. He's seeing a breakdown in the religious system. He's seeing people who are in authority completely corrupt. So you can't trust the authorities. You can't trust them. You can't trust. You can't believe that they're acting in your favor. You can't believe that they're acting in your good. So that's what the prophet is seeing. And here in these verses, he's seeing personal and social chaos in the family. He's seeing for the son treats the father with contempt, the daughter rises up against her mother, the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the men of his own house. So there's social, political, and personal chaos. And I want to focus on this particular piece, the family, because I think so my memories of Christmas are not warm and fuzzy. And if you know me from when I was in my 20s or my teenage years, you know I was Scrooge. I was the ultimate Scrooge. This is the season I hate the most because this is the season in which everyone looks so happy, glowing. I never felt that way inwardly. I felt like I just want this season to pass. I just wanted to go and everyone to just get back to normal and stop pretending to be so happy and shiny and joyful. No one is like this in reality. So for me, the Christmas was a downer. It was the lowest point of the year, and I associated with the gloominess of winter, not the joyfulness of the inward. I never felt that inward joy, and part of it was The fact that a lot of Christmases for me was spent alone, and the highlight for my Christmas was to be able to spend time alone at home watching television, because my dad's an evangelist, so he'd be traveling. This is peak season for him, right? So he's traveling, so I'm at home alone watching all of the best movies on TV. That was the highlight of my Christmas. Now I look back and I think this is just not fun. And I love how, when you think about passages like this, it tells you that the Bible is familiar with broken, wounded, dysfunctional families. It's familiar. And for you, this season as everyone enters into this season, preparing to be joyful, preparing to be hopeful, preparing to be happy, and all that stuff, there may be a tinge of sadness in your own heart. There may be a tinge of sadness in your own life. Maybe you're entering this season, and for you, coming back to family is not coming back to the feeling of family. Maybe you have a family, but it doesn't feel like a family. And maybe Christmas for you isn't warm, fuzzy feelings with shiny, happy people. Maybe it's tense feelings. Maybe it's bitter tears. Maybe it's unheard cries. Maybe it's memories of loss, memories of sadness. Maybe it's voices raised, hands raised, things thrown, things broken. While everything is in lights, you may feel like you're in darkness. And I want to be mindful of that. I want to be mindful of the fact that not everyone has a family that they feel that they're going to come home to at Christmas. I want to be mindful of that. So the first thing the prophet does when he sees all this is that he's grieving. So Micah 7 is a lament. And in lament, the Bible is actually inviting us to say that it is appropriate, it is proper, it is good to grieve. It is good to grieve the chaos that you see. It's not a bad thing. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something to run away from. It's good. It's good to grieve, and it's right to grieve. It's appropriate to grieve. And I love why the Bible is familiar with dysfunctional, broken families, because India is full of broken, dysfunctional families. It's full of them. I mean, you think of the Bible, the families in the Bible. There's polygamy, there's adultery, there's incest, there's all kinds of brokenness and murder and political uprisings. It's chaotic. And you think about India. I remember one of the movies I saw a few years ago was a movie called Kapoor and Sons. It's a movie in which you've got the typical Indian family, right? It's a typical Indian middle class family, and it's got an affair, it's got a squabble over money, there's a property issue. And listen, you're not a true Indian middle class family if you don't have a property dispute in your family, right? So there's a property issue, there's a sibling rivalry, there's the persistent pressure of great Indian expectations, right? The expectations. All our kids, we have so many expectations from our children, and there's a preference for one son over the other. And there's the constant nagging feeling of log kya kahenge, right? What are people going to say? What are people going to think? And here's the thing, that you look at this description of what the prophet sees happening in the family of his time, in this brokenness. So the son treats the father with contempt. The daughter rises up against her mother. The daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the men of his own house. And what a indictment of society, right? A man's enemies are the men of his own house. This is where everything is broken down. Like, and you can't trust anyone. That's ultimately what the prophet is saying. You can't trust your neighbor. You can't trust your leaders. You can't even trust the men of your own house, the people of your own house. You can't. This is a total breakdown of trust. And one thing that marks the truly wounded, broken family is that no one in the family feels as if they are being heard. No one feels that they're being heard. They're not being heard. And there's this website called the School of Life, in which this guy's not a Christian. He's an atheist, but he's developed this thing called the School of Life to help people cope with the realities of life. So one of the things he says is, one of our deepest longings, deeper than we even perhaps recognize day to day, is that other people should acknowledge certain of our feelings. We want that at key moments our sufferings should be understood, our anxiety is noticed, and our sadness lent legitimacy. We don't want others necessarily to agree with all our feelings, but what we crave is that they at least validate them. And he says the habit of not having one's feelings properly acknowledged begins in childhood. Now think about this. He's essentially saying it's one of the most deepest human needs to be heard, to be understood, to be known, to be seen. And so many of us have had experiences in life, whether it's a family growing up or even family now, where we feel we're not heard. We're not heard. And if that continues, then what eventually develops is trust issues. And if you live in Delhi, listen, I want to tell you something. You've got trust issues. You've got trust issues. It comes part and parcel with moving into Delhi. As soon as you come in Delhi, they give you a packet of trust issues. Here, take this. You're going to need this. So you've got trust issues, right? And trust issues are. Let me read out some symptoms of trust issues. Okay, you assume betrayal even if you have no rightful reasoning. You await betrayal. In due time, despite how honest people have been in the past, you assume betrayal. It's going to happen. Something's going to go wrong. You are overly protective of your loved ones out of fear that they will become disloyal to you. You're overly protective. You distance yourself from others. It's kind of best to limit relationships so that there's no betrayal or abandonment because you know it's coming. You avoid commitment. No matter how much you care for someone, you refuse to commit yourself to them. You don't forgive the smallest mistakes. You make a big deal out of nothing, and it's the end of the world if someone makes the slightest mistake. You're excessively wary of people. Everybody you meet, you are extremely cautious and suspicious of. You feel lonely or depressed. Your fears have led you to isolate yourself from others and enter a state of depression. And now, if you're a true Delhiite, you're thinking, I can't trust this stuff. Where did this come from? Who did you get this from? Because you've got trust issues. But I want you to know that trust issues run deep. And we've grown up if you've grown up with so much with the feeling of not being heard, it's very natural to have trust issues. And the reason I'm saying this to you is because when it comes to God, when we see political chaos and social chaos and personal chaos, our temptation is to doubt him. Can we trust God? Can we trust him? But I want you to see what the prophet does. So the prophet is seeing not just the things that we are seeing, but he's seeing it in a much worse situation. Right? He's seeing political chaos, social chaos, and personal chaos to a degree that none of us are seeing it. It's far worse for him than it is. You want to get a sense of what his situation is, it's a bit like Yemen. It's a bit like Syria. That's what the prophet is seeing. But look at him. Here he is. He's about to look at the situation, and immediately he looks to God. He looks to God. Now, how does somebody, there's no trust issues here. There's an instinctive desire to see the reality of what's going on and immediately turn to God. Immediately, instinctively. So his bias is not towards doubt, his bias is towards trust. How do you become a person like that? How do you become a person like that where you can see reality? You can see what's broken. You can see this chaos politically, this chaos socially, this chaos personally, but you're not biased towards doubt. You're biased towards trust. This is the sign of a healthy person. This is a sign of what we should all be like. And look what the prophet does. The second thing he does is that he's perceiving. He's perceiving and contemplating God. He says, but as for me, okay, now those three little words, but as for me, they're words of rebellion. I will not be the way everyone else is. It's rebellion against the status quo. Everyone may turn to doubt. Everyone may be cynical. Everyone may be jaded. Everyone may be, but as for me, this is rebellion. This is rebellion against any temptation to turn to doubt or to despair or to all of the dark, weakening thoughts in our mind. As for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. My God will hear me. I want you to think about this. So if you think about Indian families, right, we put way too much hope in knowledge and salvation. Knowledge and education. So our salvation is by education, right? We Christians believe in salvation by grace, but Indian true Indian families believe in salvation by education. And our life has a map, right? From the cradle to the classroom, to the college, to the cubicle, to the corner office, and then to the coffin. It's like a predictable story. You get from one step to another. And our obsession with education is causing nervous breakdowns. I mean, my own cousin, when he got out of school, he didn't get into the engineering college that he wanted to, so he killed himself, committed suicide, because for him, education is everything, and he didn't get what he wanted. So our obsession with education is reflected in our suicide rates. Our obsession with education is revealed in how much we idolize intellectuals, how much we look up to people who look like they know what they're talking about, who've accomplished things. We just idolize them. Right? We don't care about how they're living. We only care about what they know. They know what they're talking about. We idolize people who are intellectual. We idolize people who kind of have accomplished, have reached intellectual nirvana. And but the question is, what if you don't measure up, and what if you can't keep the pace? Now, don't get me wrong, knowledge and education are useful and practical and desirable. I'm not at all saying that this is a bad thing. Knowledge and education are very useful to get things. They're useful to get something. They're useful to get out of difficult financial situations. They're useful to get out of tough times. They're useful to get ahead in life, right? They're useful for these things, and for that reason it's good. So knowledge and education are useful to get something, but they're not useful to become someone. They're not useful to become someone who's worthy of respect or love or honor, or those are character issues, and they are not related to knowledge. They're related to wisdom. So that's why in God's thinking, he doesn't care about what we know. He cares about how we live. And he gives wisdom generously to all without finding fault. Right? So, and the reason I'm saying this is because in India, we don't need more intellectual people. We really don't. What we need is more contemplative people. We need more contemplative people. We need more contemplative prophets. That's what we need. And that's what this prophet is. When he says, I will look to the Lord, I will wait for the God of my salvation, my God will hear me. This is the language of contemplation. This is the language of contemplation. And this is the language of contemplative prayer, looking and waiting and hoping. Looking and waiting and hoping. And contemplation, if you look at the dictionary definition, it is the action of looking thoughtfully at something for a long time. That's contemplation. Looking thoughtfully at something for a long time. That's what the prophet is doing. He's just looking and waiting and confident, my God will hear me. This is the kind of people we need in a country where there's social, political, personal chaos. People who will say, but as for me, everybody else may be cynical, but as for me, I will look to the Lord, I will wait for the God of my salvation, my God will hear me. So somebody once said the first language of a church in a deeply broken world is prayer, not strategy. Strategy is important. You need to think about that stuff. You need to plan. But the first language of a church in a deeply broken world is prayer, not strategy. And so I want to talk to you about 4 stages of contemplative prayer. 4 stages of contemplative prayer that comes from a Trappist monk. This is a Trappist monk who lives on a kind of a 500-acre plot of land, and they look after other people's cows, and they bake cookies to make a living for themselves. And one of the most popular cookies is the chocolate chip cookie. So they call themselves chipmunks because they make these chocolate chip cookies. So there's a Trappist monk, and he talks about contemplative prayer. Okay, and he talks about the 4 stages of contemplative prayer. So the first stage is acquaintance. Right? When you're think about when you meet someone for the first time. I mean, your conversations are very, how are you doing? What's the weather like where you are? It's just very superficial, very kind of small talk, very casual. Uh, and in prayer, when you're becoming acquainted with God, you're really like greedy little kids. right? You've discovered that you can get things from God. I remember when I was going to school every morning, I would, my prayer would be, Lord, please let this be a good day. I didn't do my homework. Let not my teacher hit me, and all kinds of stuff like that. Very, you're greedy little kids. You realize that God can give you things that you ask for. But the second stage of prayer is friendship, and this is let's say two people enter into a relationship, right? They're listening and talking to one another, so that they take turns to talk to one another. So one person talks, the other person talks. There's listening and talking. There's this ongoing conversation back and forth. And in a relationship with God, we find that in Scripture. We find that in an assembly like this on a Sunday morning. We find that in your trust circles. You find that in different ways where you're getting to listen to God from His Word and respond to Him in prayer, respond to Him in community. This friendship, it's growing. Then there's a third stage where, let's say, these people who have met and started a relationship, they get married. So now there's intimacy. This is the falling in love stage of prayer. This is where you're falling in love with God and you want to give yourself to Him, body and soul, for your whole life. You want to just give yourself to Him. He's your true love, and you want to give yourself to Him, and you're committed to belong to Him, and you give yourself fully to Him. So this is the stage in which you're intimate with God. But the fourth stage, that's contemplative union. That's contemplative union with God. This is growing old together. This is having spent your whole life together, sitting on outside in your balcony, holding hands, not needing to say a word. This is union with God. You're one with Him. Your language to Him is your posture to Him is just being totally still, completely conscious that this is God, and you are loving Him. You're loving Him as God because He's beautiful to you. He's glorious to you. He's everything to you. And this is where, and he talks about how God calls you to this. You don't do this. God gives you a desire for Him. And if you have a desire for Him, right? If you have a desire to pray, if you have a desire to know Him, if you have a desire for Him, you are the richest person in the world. You are the richest person in the world if you have a desire for Him. Because the greatest gift that God can give to you is a desire for Him. And in contemplative union, that's what happens. Your desires become one with God. You love God and you love what He loves. And you're able to look at God and you're able to say, I love you. I love you. And there's a simplicity of heart in contemplative union. I love you because you're God. And the opposite of simplicity of heart is duplicity of heart. It's when we say to God, Lord, I love you. When are you going to get my wife? When is that going to happen? But in union, in contemplative union, you're loving God because He is God, and He's everything. And that's the experience. That experience of oneness of desire, unity of heart, two hearts beating as one. That experience is the experience of contemplative prayer. It's when our hearts grow and mature to the point that He is beautiful to us, He's everything to us, and to love Him is our greatest joy, and to know Him is our greatest joy. Now, how do you do this? How do you get to contemplative prayer? And it begins by our contemplation on God being rooted in our confidence in God. So that's the first step. Our contemplation on God is rooted in our confidence in God. Look at what the prophet says, right? Verse 6, as for me, I will look to the Lord, I will wait for the God of my salvation. Here's his confidence. My God will hear me. My God will hear me. So like now, if you live in Delhi, like I said, you have trust issues, right? You have trust issues, and our trust issues are kind of exposed most with authority figures whenever someone tries to tell us what to do. So the higher the authority figure, the deeper the suspicion. And God, being the highest authority figure, experiences the deepest suspicion from us, right? Because this is the reality of the heart. Now, here's what's important, and here's what I want you to hear carefully, right? Your deepest loyalty, your deepest loyalty will always be to those people whom you feel understand you most deeply. Your deepest loyalty will always be to those people whom you feel understand you most deeply. That's the your deepest. You may believe all the right things about Christianity. You may believe all the right theology, you may have all of that, but your loyalty, your allegiance will always be to people who feel understand you most deeply. And what but look at the confidence that this has, and this is why it's important, right? I wanted to tell you why this is important. David Osberger, he's an author. He says being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person they are almost indistinguishable. Did you get that? Being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person it's almost indistinguishable. So to feel that you are heard by someone, to feel that you are understood by someone, feels like being loved by them. That's why your deepest loyalty will be to them. But look at the prophet's confidence. His confidence is the fact that God will hear me. My God will hear me. He knows. So what he's really saying is, my God will love me, because that's why he's got his that's why God has his deepest loyalty, because he knows that there is no one in the universe who knows him, understands him more than this God. My God will hear me. And I want you to know, that maybe God wants to say to you today that he has always heard you. He's always known you. In your deepest disappointment, in your darkest night, in your greatest sorrow, your the darkest humiliation, the most searing loss, in everything, he has heard you. He knows you. So our contemplation on God is rooted in our confidence in God. It's also rooted in his contemplation on us. I mean, this is what Psalm 139 says: you have searched me and you know me. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You are familiar with all my ways. You discern my going out and my lying down. Before a word is on my tongue, Lord, you know it completely. Such knowledge is too lofty, too wonderful for me, too lofty for me to attain. What it's saying is that God himself looks at us and God himself contemplates us. And he's able to say to us as well, I love you. There's nothing that you can give to me that will make me love you more. I love you because everything that is needed for me to love you, I have provided. And this is what God is able to say to us. Anyone, and uh, and this is ultimately the prophet's hope and his reason for having trust, not doubt, because he is confident that God can hear him and he's confident that God knows him. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. Okay, if anybody knew you the way that God knows you, would they love you? If you knew me the way God knows me, I don't know if you'd be hearing me. I don't know if you would love me. I don't. Why is God hearing us? Why does this God who knows us so well, who knows us so deeply, so intimately, why does he hear us? He should be turning his face away from us. Why does he do this? So ultimately, our confidence in God comes from the condescension of God. The condescension of God, the theologians have a term to the condescension of God is a theological term, and it basically means means God stooping down to become one of us, to hear us. Like you think about a baby. I mean, you had a baby dedication today. Think about how adults talk to babies. They condescend. They lower their language. They break down their complicated normal ways of speaking to speak to this baby. They condescend in order to speak to the baby. They'll say all kinds of blah, blah, hey, blah, 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 blah. Everything just falls apart because you're condescending in order to speak to this baby. That's what God did to us at Christmas. He condescends. He comes into this world. He is not listening to us from far distant sky, pie in the sky reality. He gets into the dirt. He becomes a baby. He becomes a human being. He condescends to speak to us, to hear us. And he comes into our world. And what was his life like? He walks many years after this prophet. Jesus will walk through Jerusalem and he's going to see the same thing. He's going to see callous people. He's going to see corrupt leaders. And he is going to have a family that rejects him. His own family will think he's out of his mind. His brothers will mock him, ridicule him. He's going to be arrested and betrayed by religious leaders. The entire the courtroom scene that put him on trial was a sham. It was completely unjust, broke every local law. He's going to come under the weight of corrupt leaders, callous people, and a broken family. He's going to share in our sufferings. He's going to become like one of us. He's going to condescend. And that's the extent to which he goes to hear us. He's a fellow sufferer. And ultimately, he's going to go to the cross. And on the cross, he's going to say to God, my God, why have you forsaken me? He is not heard on the cross. God will not hear him. Do you know why? So that he can always hear you. So that he will never forsake you. That's the extent to which God condescends. And that's the reason, knowing what he knows about us, there is no reason that he will never hear us, because everything in us that makes us contemptible to God was put on Jesus Christ, so that we can always be heard. And we will always have his faithfulness, because he will never leave us and never forsake us. That's the assurance that we have. And whatever difficult times may mean, whatever suffering may mean, there are a few things it can never mean. It can never mean that God has left us. It can never mean that God has rejected us. It can never mean that God has forsaken us. And it can never mean that he does not hear us. Whatever suffering may mean, it can't mean any of those things, because the cross rebukes those ideas. It rebukes them, because we have in him someone who hears us and knows us and has condescended to us. And more than anything, he has condescended to us to put his spirit in our own hearts. His spirit now lives in us. The Son was sent to the cross so that the Spirit could be sent into our hearts. And there's not a single living being in the world who can hear you and know you the way the Spirit of God can, because he lives in you. He lives in you. And in Romans, we get this picture of how even our wordless groans are heard. And even when we don't know what to pray, the Spirit himself intercedes for us. So there is no love in the world, no person in the world that can match the way that God hears you and knows you. There's nothing else. And that's why, and that's my prayer for you, that this Christmas, more than anything, you will know his deep knowledge of you. And you will know that there's nobody in the world who hears you more than he does. Nobody in the world who knows you more than he does, and nobody in the world who loves you more than he does. And that will bring out of you the deepest loyalty to him. And that will turn you into a contemplative person who, whatever happens, whatever you see in reality, whatever you see around you, you too, like the prophet, will be able to say, but as for me, I will look to the Lord. I will wait for the God of my salvation. And you'll have that confidence. My God will hear me.